Europe is in a crucial time period because at least two transformations are happening in the energy area. First, Europe needs to cut several decades of dependence on the Russian gas and Russian oil, but oil is fungible. You can get oil from the Middle East, you can get oil from Africa. It's a global commodity. Gas, especially the piped gas, is a regional commodity, and Europe developed this dependency, especially because of the German policy of buying more and more Russian gas. If not this war, the German dependence on gas would have gone from 40% to about 55% of the gas for Germany. So it needs to kick that dependence. That's one. And two, the Energiewende, the energy transformation, will continue. It may go faster, it may go slower, but we also need to rethink the mix of the non-carbon energy, in my opinion. And the third transformation in that respect is inside the nuclear business, because nuclear is an anathema. It's a very problematic issue in Europe, especially here in Austria and Germany. But we are on the verge of new technology in nuclear. So the three transformations, how do you manage them? First, you diversify your gas supply. You stop buying 140, 150 billion cubic meters a year from Russia. Not at once, you reduce it, but already you went down from 140 to about 40 or 50 billion cubic meters, so times 3 almost. And you diversify the geographic sources. You bring more gas from Azerbaijan, we talked about it at the conference, from Africa, North Africa, you can bring more from Libya and Algeria. You can develop an important gas province in Eastern Mediterranean. Egypt, the Zohr field, Israel, the Leviathan field, Aphrodite, the Cypriot field, and there's some gas offshore Lebanon and Syria. Together, you have a capacity for 50 BCM, quite a lot of gas. You need good relations between Turkey and its neighbors, always a challenge. Turkey doesn't necessarily get along with all the neighbors. In addition to that, you expand your LNG capacity, not just the new German terminals, but also terminals in Portugal and Spain that are not connected to the rest of Europe because of the French resistance in the gas field, not in the World War II meaning. Anyway, the French are afraid that that gas would interfere with their ability to produce nuclear electricity from the reactors. And finally, you, in my view, need to think about not just solar and wind, which is fine if you can get it, but it's intermittent. When there's no wind and it's dark at night, there's no generating capacity from renewables. You also need to consider the new technologies in nuclear, the small modular reactors, SMRs, a lot of new technology coming online and will be available. We also should not discount coal yet as an important source of cheap electricity. There's a huge capacity of thermal power stations in Europe, and keeping that market open. Coal, by the way, if it's imported even from Russia, it is not making Putin rich because it's not a high value added commodity like natural gas or oil. So coal also has a legacy role, but it's an important role because it's cheap in this energy transition that Europe is undergoing until such time as the majority of electricity is carbon-free, which means not just wind and solar, which in Europe it's something like 5% at this moment, but also hydro, nuclear, etc. So, as Paris Hilton said, in 2008, all of the above, not just one type of energy, all of the energy taking into account economic capacity. It is not in the interest of the United States to have Europe price itself out of the energy market and have very expensive energy, which would in turn depress the European economy, create social problems, unemployment, and social protests in Europe. We don't need that. We as Americans want strong and prosperous Europe with abundant and reliable energy.
So Azerbaijan will start exporting extra 10 BCM of gas to Europe. It's beyond 10 BCM that the country currently exports to Italy, Greece, and Bulgaria. For that, Azerbaijan needs to increase its gas production and obviously expand the Southern Gas Corridor, its segments, which is the South Caucasus Pipeline, TANAP, and TAP. So all these pipelines needs to be expanded, and the capacity needs to be doubled to export an additional 10 BCM. This gas will play an important role in the market, in Southeast European and Central European market. So countries that are express strong interest to import this extra 10 BCM are Italy, Greece, Bulgaria, Albania, Macedonia, Hungary, Serbia, Romania, and possibly other countries in Central Europe that could get this Azerbaijani gas in mid-term perspective. For that, interconnectors in Europe between these countries that I mentioned needs to be developed. Existing one needs to be expanded, and where interconnectors are missing needs to be constructed in order to freely send this gas to other European countries. This is the second energy corridor going to Europe, from Azerbaijan to Europe. And the third one would be the Green Corridor. Azerbaijan has also signed agreements with Romania and Hungary to export solar and wind energy. And this project is by scale no smaller than the Southern Gas Corridor, because it's also a standalone project, which is optic fiber undersea infrastructure that will export green energy to European countries from 2030. So this is third corridor, and I would call the fourth corridor of the possible green hydrogen export from Azerbaijan to Europe, again beyond 2030, once we develop green energy, solar and wind infrastructure, and invest in hydrogen, produce hydrogen, and export hydrogen to Europe, again starting from 2030. So Azerbaijan as a gas, green energy, and in the future hydrogen supply is becoming even more important for Southeast European market, which can substitute some gas coming from Russia with Azerbaijani gas, and in the future hydrogen. And here Turkey will play an important role, not only as a transit country, but as another party to gas exports to Europe.
The main points of what I would like to say were that after 1 year of the war and after 1 year of the European and G7 sanctions, we got a completely new situation with the Russian energy supplies, when almost all of them are either sanctions or somehow restricted or banned by the Europeans. And as a result, the Russians are now selling their gas, their oil, and their coal at huge discounts, looking for the new markets, desperately looking for the new markets. So the Russian coal goes now predominantly to China, because all the other ways to export it produces a huge cost for transportation costs. Russian oil flows first of all to India, also to China, to Turkey, to Pakistan, to other destinations, and they're just looking for more potential buyers. And the gas is actually locked inside Russia. They increased the supplies to China by around 40% last year, but it's far not enough. Even the Turkish pipes, they also cannot consume all the gas Russia wants to export. So in gas, they have a huge drop in production, not so much in oil and coal, but nevertheless. And so my major point was that I think that in some future, the Europeans and the Russians should restore, at least partly, the energy cooperation for making Europe not so much dependent on Russia, but consuming some of Russian energy supplies and introducing some kind of special policy like solidarity tax, like special surcharges for that can be put on the price of the Russian gas and oil and coal, and go to the restoration of the Ukrainian economy after the war, because it's very little probability of Russia being defeated in a way that it will repay the damage it caused to the Ukrainian economy. So therefore, it should be found some additional source of funding for Ukraine should be found. And the most effective and the most probable and the easiest one might be just, to tax the Russian energy resources, which may be sold in Europe, and to channel this tax for the Ukrainian, for the sake of Ukrainian economy. So these were two of my major points, because I feel very sorry and dissatisfied by the fact that the Europeans actually curbed the Russian budget revenues, introducing this price cap on oil, but they're not profiting from it. So they introduce this price cap, they force the Russian oil to be sold on the world market by a 40% discount to the Brent, and all the profits from it are now getting, the Chinese and the Indians and Pakistanis and all other buyers of the Russian oil, but not the Europeans themselves. So something should be done for not, turning back to Russia, but just to use the current situation for the sake of the European consumers as well.